You for the rest of the evening, and with me I have a panel which I'm very happy to have here, very proud to be able to present. Andrew Krogling is sitting to my right. He's Head of Information and Policy at the Development Fund, or Utviklingsfondet, as we call it in Norwegian, and he's also leader of the board at Forum, which is an organisation for utvikling og miljø. To his left, we have Nikolai Astrup, whom you may know, is a Member of Parliament for Høyre, also a member of the Environment and Energy Committee, and environmental spokesperson for Høyre. And of course, Polly Higgins should need no further introduction now, but thank you for still staying with us. I'm going to start by letting the panel comment on what we just heard. And at a fairly early point, I think I'm going to open up for questions to all the parties from the audience, because I guess many of you have interesting perspectives that would be good to get an airing. And we aim to finish before 8 o'clock, so we can better just get going, I think. Would you like to start, Nikolai?
Thank you, and thank you for a very interesting talk. I think you raise some important perspectives that we need to consider. I do think, though, that there are some challenges that needs to be addressed as well. First of all, given the challenges that we have in agreeing on an international climate deal, is it really realistic to think that we're going to have all the countries in the world sign up to this law through the UN? I, for one, think that's not very likely, at least not in the short run. Then, given the definition of ecocide that you have here, I think this definition will also be will also stop important developments that are necessary to solve climate change. For instance, you mentioned that Statoil could be Stat Renewables. We actually already have Stat Renewables in Norway, and it's Europe's biggest renewable company. But a lot of the projects that they do would never happen, given the definition of ecocide that you've just put on the table. For instance, hydropower. Of course, that. And then my time was almost out. Hydropower plants, solar plants, high-speed rail links. These are projects that, in many cases, will entail land conversion. And land conversion from nature, pristine nature, to industrial, to an industrial site, which also renewables represent, will inevitably cause damage to the natural inhabitants of that area. So I'm not sure I actually support the idea at all because of this. Because we need to have laws that actually that doesn't stand in the way of progress. And I think this is a law which run the risk of doing so. Then, secondly, I think it's important to recognize that profits are important also in the service of the environment. We need technological breakthroughs if we're going to solve the huge challenges we have in climate change and addressing climate change. And in order to get technological breakthroughs, we need to make it more profitable to invest in green technologies. We need to use the market in the service of the environment. And we can't, by law, make companies that invest in green technologies profitable. But we can use other mechanisms, which I think are important. And we need to decouple economic growth and environmental damage. And I think we agree on that point. But how we do it is a different question. I think we have laws on biodiversity in Norway, and most countries, and they help us they are important because they mean that actually the law on biodiversity in Norway is quite strict, but it doesn't stand in the way developing, for instance, new wind farms or new hydropower plants, it does stop some projects though, which when they damage the environment in such a way that it's not sustainable. But it doesn't stand in the way of all new projects. And then, so I think we need to have a set of, well, a range of different mechanisms to solve the issues that we have in front of us. We need laws, we need good laws. I'm not sure we're going to manage to get an international law, but I think we need to work on the national laws to make sure that they are good. We need regulations, we need taxes, we need to make it more expensive to pollute on a global scale, and hence making it more profitable for companies to invest in green technologies. And that will also be necessary to achieve the technological breakthroughs that we have. But also, I think it's more complicated than when you mentioned the Amazon, which is a place where I've been. 25 million people live in the Amazon. A law will make no difference for them. If they need to burn down a piece of wood, they will. And we need to get the people who live in the Amazon on board. And in order to do that, we need, I think, different mechanisms than the law. The law can, of course, be a start, but it doesn't actually help on the ground. And I think what Norway is doing, and we're spending billions, committing billions of kroners on saving the rainforest, especially in Brazil, but also in other countries, by going in and starting projects on the ground. I think that's a way forward as well. I have to say though, when it comes to tar sands, I've been to the Athabasca as well, and I've been to both an open mine and pit, and I agree, it's terrible. It should be forbidden. But I've also been to Statoil's field in Canada, and that is not an open mine pit. So that's important to emphasize. And it does not look anything like the picture you showed at all. So just to say that as well. I think there is some positive news on this as well, on this area as well. I mean, on biodiversity. The Nagoya Protocol came in 2011, which was Takk for det, jeg skal gjøre det. She was just telling me that I shouldn't talk to you, so I have to talk to them. So I'll try to do that now. But it's difficult when I'm actually talking to you. I think the Nagoya Protocol, which was signed in 2011, is an important step forward. It needs to be adhered to, and that's the same with the law. I mean, making a law is fine, but making sure that companies and people follow the law, it must be critical, I think. Because that was my comment so far.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. We're going to give the word to Andrew and then afterwards.
Standing, actually. When I realised that you come from Scotland, I was taken back, as I told you when we spoke just a while ago, to when I was a young student. I travelled all the way up to the Orkney Islands. I don't know what came to my mind, but I went into a pub there and I presented myself as an undercover agent from the Norwegian Crown. I said that I had a task to do for the Norwegian King Haakon. And that was to ask the people of the Orkneys if they wanted to become citizens of or under the Norwegian Crown instead of being under the British Crown. And the pub took me to heart. They bought all the beer I wanted, and I had a splitting headache. So there's something about this Scots, and there is a part of history called the Scottish Enlightenment, and I think that Polly is a proud bearer of that type of, let's say, Scottish heritage. Your introduction was both elegant and eloquent, and it inspired me a lot. I must admit that even though I've been traveling a lot around the world, going to Rio and other conferences, that I didn't know very much about the ecocide idea. But I have been more enlightened now. I think it is a very good idea. I think that this is the way forward. I think that what we are looking for, both in Norway and internationally, is companies with a triple bottom line. People, planet, profits. I mean, that is the way forward. There is no other way forward. Of course, we need profits. We need profits in order to create innovations and stuff like that. And we need to take care of people. We need the social things in place. We need distribution and stuff like that. And we need to take care of our planets. And I think that your work is very much in line with the general work which is being done by a lot of different institutions at this present time. And in the old days, of course, people used to have religious leaders who were the leaders of societies. And in the olden days, you had Noah and others, whistleblowers, who told people, you know, it's about time that we split up, we build an ark, and we do something else in order to survive. We don't have those types of gurus today. We have science. And science is probably a better way forward. And your work, coupled together with, let's say, the Stockholm Resilience Center, which has pinpointed 9 so-called planetary boundaries, which they must under no circumstances be trespassed. 3 of those boundaries have already been trespassed, which is climate change, biodiversity, and phosphorus and nitrogen cycles into nature. The others are still fairly all right, or under less pressure. And we need to keep on discussing these various types of ways of seeing the integration of people and planet and business. You have stuff like the Earth Charter. You have different other international institutions and charters. And I think in many ways your idea and the people with whom you work are just as important as those who work on alternatives to the gross national product, for instance. Just like Stiglitz or Fitoussi or Amartya Sen, these type of people, they are extremely important. They are now asking for a different way of measuring how we should go about measuring our success as a nation. The gross domestic product isn't enough any longer. People talk about the Bhutan's the gross domestic, the gross happiness index. Different ways of seeing how we should measure success. And I find that economists, lawyers, and storytellers, artists, those are the 3 most important categories of different working trades, because they have a lot of respect in society. And I think that if we manage to get, as you now indicate at the end of your talk, UNEP and the UN system on board in order to propose in international conventions that this type of thinking on law should be implemented so that you have a level playing field for all nations. This is extremely important. It must be the same level of playing on that field. And in that sense, I think that your speech is super. And we'll discuss maybe some of Nikolai's comments afterwards.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Polly, would you like to pick up some of the points that Nikolai came with? Firstly, the question whether it was realistic to manage to pass this into legislation. Thank you.
What's very interesting about an international law of ecocide is that there's a fast-track system here. All I'm looking for is an amendment to an existing document, not a whole new convention or a treaty or a protocol, where you would need sign-off by all nations. In fact, I have an amendment to the Rome Statute only requires a 2/3 majority of existing signatories. So that's 81 people in the world can make this an international law. In fact, that's a mountain, but it's a small mountain in comparison to trying to get this implemented country by country, because that would be damaging to economies. As Andrew rightly pointed out, this is about creating a level playing field at the very top end. It's about how it's implemented, the devil in the detail of the legislation. And we had an opportunity to road test that. We held a mock ecocide trial in the UK Supreme Court. and Sky News live streamed it the whole day, and its entirety is in fact on YouTube, and there are excerpts up on the website and such like. And in fact, we've open sourced all the documents, and that allowed some of our top legal brains in Britain to come together. And not just Britain, we had international lawyers involved, where they inputted into the drafting of the national legislation. When you put something in place at international level, then it has an effect on national legislation. And we drafted up an Ecocide Act, then put it to the test. And that was a very interesting exercise, because we had a real judge, we had a real jury who'd been particularly vetted. In fact, we vetted them to a very high standard, over and above what's normally done to ensure that there was no bias. And we had real legal teams. Michael Mansfield QC prosecuted, and Chris Parker QC defended with the legal teams. Now, of course, this was a mock ecocide trial, and it was only for one day, so we didn't look at all aspects, but we did look at the adverse impact on birds. That was really our one aspect that we could look at, and it allowed us to tease out many, many important issues. And there were 3 counts on the indictment. Now, the jury came back, and we didn't know what decision would be made, and they convicted on 2 of the 3 counts. 2 were to do with the Athabasca tar sands. The 3rd was the BP Gulf oil spill, and that was an acquittal. And it kind of takes me to the point that actually Nikolai brought up about hydropower and such like. What we're dealing here is mass damage and destruction on an enormous scale, and we already have parameters for that in wartime, for size, duration, impact. Size being 200 kilometres more, duration over a certain period or more, and impact, severity of impact to human, natural or economic resources. So the proposal is being to use precisely the same parameters that we use during wartime, and we use it during peacetime. And of course, if you're looking at severity of impact on ecosystems, something that is a continually damaging and destructive process on a day-by-day process, like unconventional tar extraction, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's contained if you just take it underground, because you can have mass adverse impact underground. It's just that sometimes when it's above ground, it's very visible. Then what you're doing is you're really putting in parameters that are dealing with enormous damage and devastation. Hydropower doesn't really qualify at that level. And we're looking at really stopping the worst manifestations of it, and challenging companies to use processes that then ensure that they do not cross that boundary. You know. And I'm absolutely delighted that we do actually have stacked renewables. Wouldn't it be wonderful if that was your major player rather than your minor player in all of this, and to give them the enabling conditions legislatively to do that would be absolutely fantastic. And then get them to do it in every country right across Europe and the world. Goodness, you'd make an awful lot of money then.
Thank you, Paul. Andrew?
Just one comment, which I forgot. I found that a lot of what you were talking about resonated well here in Norway, because it resembles a lot of what Professor Arne Næss was talking about, the deep ecology movement and stuff like that. So I think that is maybe one of the reasons why you feel at home here in Norway also. The second thing is that my organization is now working on a report which is going to be published later on in February on the Ombudsman for future generations here in Norway. We're trying to promote that and are going to hand it over to politicians. On the Amazon, I find that you might have misunderstood a little bit, because I don't think that the small-scale farmer is the basic problem in the Amazon. Those things can be amended through education projects, stuff like that. And the Norwegian Red project, good as it is, I'm supportive of that, of course, is also undermined, on the other hand, by the Norwegian Pension Fund, and a study being done which was done by the Norwegian Rainforest Foundation and the Norwegian Society for Conservation of Nature a year ago, showed that the Norwegian Pension Fund invests 27 times more money in projects and companies which destroy the rainforest than the Norwegian Red investment. So, you know, we take with one hand and give with the other. So it's,
Paul, you talked about using the same parameters as with the war crime, war ecocide. So I'm wondering what kind of consequences, or what would you legislate with the Lakeside law? What kind of consequences would it have for Norwegian oil industry, for instance, or Norwegian society? Because you're talking about phasing it in within a 5-year period, so it sounds like quite a big changes within a short period of space. Could you tell us a bit about that?
I'm not anti-profit, not at all. In fact, I'm very pro-profit. What I'm challenging is where that profit flows from. And it's very interesting to hear stats such as the Norwegian pension fund being 27 times more investment in what really would be deemed under a law of ecocide as dangerous industrial activity. So what that would mean is that it would fundamentally reshape what the Norwegian pension fund invests in, and that's a very powerful lever in its own right. What is very interesting about a law of ecocide is that it has this is all about the flow of money, and about the flow of money being accountable at the end of the day. And when we do that and actually ask questions, where is this money, where is this investment coming from, then we are able to fundamentally close the door, turn off the tap upstream. Because when you're looking at the flow of money at the moment, a lot of money is flowing into dangerous industrial activity by dint of necessity. It's very difficult for the Norwegian pension fund to actually invest in renewables, for instance. It's just not scaled up to that level because it's not prioritised by law. It's not given the same level of subsidies that fossil fuel is given. So it's very difficult for that to happen, and this is why a transition period is very important, to actually literally phase out subsidies in innovation one direction and phase up the subsidies and assistance and innovation in the other direction, so that then you can transition in the pension funds and other investment into another area. But it's more than that. This is about jobs at the end of the day. And that's something that every single country in the world is hungry for, is jobs. Now, creating jobs out of innovation in the other direction is obviously hugely important, because we are needing to scale up in a very big way. Now, it could well be that Statoil can drive forward as a great leader in all of this. And that would be truly fantastic, especially as they may well be the company that is the cleanest company out there. I don't know. But that's their challenge that they will meet with this legislation. And also it's the legislation that will enable and empower Stat Renewables to go big, really big, very fast. And that's really fantastic in its own right. And I'm sure that's something that Statoil would welcome, is that they would have that finance and investment to allow them to drive the innovation in the other direction, and the jobs that will flow from that as well. This is something that has very positive benefits long term for creating resilient economies, without a doubt. This is not about compromising industries. If anything, it's as one gold and diamond mining baron who supports my work said, this is about moving from the mass butchery to the keyhole surgery. And that's what this is about, ultimately, at the end of the day.
Nicolai?
Well, I'm relieved to hear that this law will not stop all the positive projects that we need on infrastructure, more solar parks, more aluminium companies, because aluminium is part of the solution. We have one in Norway, which is one of the biggest in Europe, but we need to produce more of that material, which can replace, for instance, steel. So I'm happy to hear that. I, though, did not read the definition that way. So, but I'm also not a lawyer, although I'm married to one, which sometimes feels like the same. She's now a judge, which is even worse. I have to say though that I think what we need is the fundamental change that we need. Has to be that the polluter must pay, and the polluter must pay more than today. And that will not change with the law. That needs to come with a political decision. And And if we do that, we will also see that investment will flow into the green technologies and the green companies, and we need that. We need that to make that transition from the society we have today to a low emission society. And but at the same time, I wouldn't close down Statoil tomorrow anyway. We need gas as a transition to a renewable society, even the International Energy Agency points out that even in a 2-degree scenario, oil and gas will be important because we will not be able to replace fossil fuels fast enough. Because remember that 1.4 billion people live without access to electricity at all. 2.7 billion people in the world cook their food based on firewood. And 1.4 million people die, mostly women and children, every year because of the fumes from wooden fires used for cooking. So we have an enormous challenge, lifting billions of people out of poverty, creating enough electricity, energy consumption, meeting energy demand around the world, and at the same time reducing emissions by 50 to 85% by 2050, and taking care of biodiversity issues, which is extremely important. So I think a law is a positive bit, but we need a lot more in order to move the world in the right direction.
Just one short comment on that. I, a lot of sense in what you're saying when it comes to those stoves and being, that we use a lot of charcoal and woods and stuff like that. My own organization is involved in improving stoves for poor people, and that we do via the Overseas Development Aid budget. So that's, a message from me to you, that your party, if they came into power, must not cut on that budget, because we are doing something about the thing you're now saying is a problem.
I'd like to respond to that. Polly, when we invited you, we tried to get someone from the foreign ministry to come and be part of the event, and they sent a mail instead of coming themselves. And they were concerned about the International Criminal Court, who is supposed to regulate this when it comes into effect. They were talking about it being a very young institution and needing to consolidate and organize itself more effectively before giving it a new area of jurisdiction. How appropriate do you find that the ICCC is as a tool? And this is lack of capacity a problem, or other aspects that are important?
This is a very important point. The International Criminal Court is a new beast. It was put in place in 2002. Its first case was brought in 2005. Before that, we had international criminal courts that were only of temporary jurisdiction. So we had the Nuremberg war trials after World War II, and then when that was done, it was closed. Likewise, with Rwanda and Yugoslavia, independent tribunals were set up. So what we have is an international criminal court, and of course an amendment to the Rome Statute would then give the ICC the capacity to prosecute, not just for genocide, but also for ecocide. The International Criminal Court is a court of what's known as court of last resort. So it only steps in when national governments are either unwilling or unable to take action. So the first starting point is actually at a national level, or an EU level, for instance, here, then it can be addressed first and foremost there. But it's rather like a piece of hardware that's in desperate need of an upgrade. It only has 4 courtrooms. Any crime court in Britain has 5 to 10 times more than that. And that's remarkable given that they have over 2,000 cases referred to them every year, and a case can last a year easily, if not longer. So it needs scaling up without a doubt. And this is a very hot topic in the international legal world, whether or not we scale up the International Criminal Court, whether or not we put in place an International Court for the Environment, whether or not the International Criminal Court passes preliminary judgments that there is a case to be heard, and then outsources it to a neutral country and passes a legal order so that the case can be heard in another country, and that way defray the system and expedite matters far faster and allow more cases to be brought. So this is all part and parcel of the international legal debate that is really heating up in a very big way. And some people favour one over the other and what have you. It doesn't really matter. What's important here is that it is being taken seriously, that something needs to be done to assist that process. And also it's a recognition that a crime of ecocide is not just something that you necessarily say is just environmental, because actually it has huge implications for corporate law and many different other areas. In fact, it will have huge implications for many, many industries right across, as well as, and not just industry, governmental and non-governmental. So this is part of the growing narrative that's emerging around where we're moving towards. It's now becoming far more mainstream, if you like, and it's been taken very seriously, and something has to happen here. I think that's fundamentally what's driving this, is the recognition that we are in a position that the laws we have are just not good enough, they're not solving the problem. And we're needing to move forward far faster and impute a legal duty of care, mandatory, not voluntary, but mandatory duty of care on CEOs and directors, on heads of states and ministers, on financing houses. And that's what's really, really important here. That fundamentally shifts our understanding when we take responsibility at the very top end.
Thank you. We're going to have Nikolai, and then we're going to open up the word.
Just a quick comment. I think for such a court to work, it needs to be respected by all parties, of course, and it needs to have legitimacy. I think the problem will be take for instance Canada. Canada will never sign up to this, I think, because in fact that will outlaw the tar sand industry, which is huge, and it's one of the last large reserves of oil in the world. So I don't think Canada will sign it, and if they do, it might not even apply for Alberta, because the states in Canada are extremely sovereign in many ways. I had a discussion when I was over there about the Kyoto Protocol, because of course Canada has signed up to the Kyoto Protocol, but it's not binding for the states as such. It has no effect on the ground, and so there are some issues, I think, that needs to be addressed for this to be an idea that can actually work in the real world.
Nikolai has brought up a very good point. The Kyoto Protocol does not have any legal teeth to it. This is a huge problem. It states that it's legally binding, but if you read the document, you will not find anything in it that has enforcement mechanisms. So this is something that's hugely important. And international criminal law, of course, has legal teeth. And Canada is a very good example, because they are signatories to the Rome Statute. But of course, when you're looking at a 2/3 majority to enforce it, Canada's vote is just one vote. Whereas 54 small island states that are looking at a law that will create a legal duty of care, which will ensure that they will be given assistance for rising sea levels, is an enormous block vote. In other words, the Maldives vote is as important as Canada's is for the passing of this legislation. Now, whether or not they remain signatories to the Rome Statute is another matter, but what you find is that you fundamentally shift the norms of business practice across the world. For instance, America is not a signatory to the Rome Statute. Of the 121 countries that are. But America is a very good example of a law like this being put in place. Suddenly they'll discover that their industry is massively restricted on where it can continue to practice ecocidal activity. And it restricts the flow of finance as well. So they will only be able to practice without actually being held to account in certain countries, because every other country is actually adhering to a whole new set of rules. And America, and Canada for that matter, if they want to remain global leaders in industry, will find it increasingly difficult to raise the finance and to operate in an international arena. unless they adhere to the way the rest of the world is operating. It's not a completely flawless system, but it's rather like the law of theft. You know, we all have the law of theft in our legislation. It doesn't mean that theft has disappeared, and some people get away with it, but we think it's wrong. And if someone steals something from you, action is taken. And that's what's important here, is that those who actually hold their countries and governments and their systems to account through an international and national legal system will apply this. Some won't, but it will become the exception, not the norm. And what we're doing here is we're fundamentally shifting norms at the very top level. And that's what's really important. And really important for industry, where you are legally prioritising the innovation in the other direction and really helping things like what Andrew's talking about get off the ground once and for all, because that's really what we need here. And that's about changing the rules of the game at the very top end. Not everyone will comply, absolutely. And we do have challenges as to how we get those who don't comply to comply. But the first step, the first most important step, is to bring those on board who will and want to comply. And that then forces the issue for those who are left remaining standing behind and running very slowly, actually, upstream when everyone else is going downstream.
I'll let Nikolai reply to that. And if you have any questions for Polly or any of the other panelists, please just raise your hand and apply.
I think that talking about two-thirds majority is one thing, but this, of course, is a kind of law that needs everyone to be signatories to work at all. And you can't enforce two-thirds majority in the UN cannot force Canada to do anything, in essence. It's about changing the laws in that country, top down. And they need to sign up to it for that to work, two-thirds majority or not. The UN is an interesting system, and and during the Cold War, for instance, the UN was, of course, completely paralyzed on every important issue in the world. Well, almost every important issue in the world. And it just goes to show that you need more than a two-thirds majority for this to work.
So a very interesting part of the discussion, but I think I'm going to give the word to the lady in red at the front there. Raise your hand first.
Thank you.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Torel Amira Pedersen. I have no question, actually. I just was so impressed when I saw your introduction a couple of days ago. And I just felt, wow, you're brave. And I'm going to be brave too. I'm used to work in economics. But 7 years ago, I had a huge awakening during a near-death experience. So no, I'm an artist, and I fit into that category, and I want to contribute. I've been working hard in my field. And what I also feel very much, because this is about the heart and the mind, and these two connected. It's about a new way of thinking. I feel very much about building bridges between people. I know there's a huge wave of awakening of consciousness all over the globe. And there will be a crave for changes. And when there are changes, there also will be resistance. That's a part of the crave. So thank you so much from my part.
Thank you very much. Please keep your questions short and to the point.
Kjetil Fless from the website Observation. To Nikolai Astrup, you said a couple of times, or I understood you, that you hesitate in using laws. And
so you think you can go up and talk into the...
Okay. you hesitate in using laws, if I understood you right, a couple of times. My question to you is, if we can't use laws to secure environment, when we talk about profitable business, what should we then use?
I'm not against using laws to protect the environment, and we have, for instance, Norwegian continental shelf is the cleanest, most environmental continental shelf in the world. Why is it the most environmentally friendly? Because we have the strictest laws. We have the CO2 tax, which my party imposed 20 years ago. For instance, I mentioned we have a biodiversity law in Norway, naturmangfoldloven, which is one of the strictest in the world. That's great, I support it. But we don't create technological innovation by law. That is created by investing in the green technologies in the companies and making a profit on making the world a greener and better place. And I think we need to look at both laws, regulations, tax systems, and other market-based mechanisms to stimulate that kind of change from a fossil-based polluting society to a low-emission society. And we need to do it without fundamentally recasting our lifestyle. I say that the car is here to stay, but it needs to stop polluting. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. We're not going to convince 5 million Norwegians to let their car stay in the garage or not have a car at all. It works if you live in Oslo. If you live in Finnmark, Hedmark, or any other county without that many public transportation modes, then you're going to have a huge problem. The answer is technological innovation. And we're going to see a huge change in the coming years. In 3 years, China has revolutionized the solar cell industry. Costs are through the floor, and that's fantastic. And it means that solar parks are now profitable without subsidies in many places in the world, including California. If you manage, by technological innovation, to increase the efficiency of a solar cell from 17 to 35%, which is possible, then solar cells will be competitive with shale gas. You can pass any law you want, but that's the kind of technological breakthrough that we need. And it's going to come, and it's going to require both bold politicians and lots of scientists and engineers and other great minds that put their efforts into it. But I think we're going to make it. And making laws is part of that. The only thing I'm saying is that I don't think it's realistic to get all the countries in the world to sign up to this idea. And I think we need to start with the national laws. In Norway we have quite good laws on environmental standards. We can always be better, but that's not going to solve the problem in itself.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
Sorry. Now I'm going to give it to the gentleman in the purple t-shirt there.
Hello, my name is Nils Leidal, and I have a question, or a comment rather, to Nikolai. You mentioned that hydroelectric power plants is one of the reasons why this wouldn't work, because we have to still build out hydroelectric power plants, because that's more environmentally friendly than many other energy sources. But I think that's an example of you thinking in an old-fashioned way, like most established political parties are doing. For instance, there are now water turbines, micro power plants that you can put into any river without any impact on nature. So that's an example that we can build out lots of hydroelectric power, but that's not legal in this system that we have here. It's a monopoly when it comes to electricity, you know. Small scale electricity power plants is possible in many ways, but it's held down. Why? And what do you want to do about it?
Just a short answer.
Well, there are hundreds and hundreds of small-scale hydropower plants being built in Norway right now through the subsidies that we have imposed joint with Sweden. So I'm not worried about that at all. but Norway would never achieve 130 terawatt hours a year in production by small-scale hydropower alone. The large hydropower plants that we have is the backbone of our energy system, and it's the reason why we have 100% renewable energy in our electricity here in Norway.
It's just a matter of numbers and turbines.
I'm going to give you the...
Well, I'm not going to put every little river through.
I myself have a river.
Exactly, and you're free to apply for a micro for a microkraftwerk any day.
Thank you. I'm going to give the word to Tormod now for one of the last questions.
First, I just wanted to say that clearly laws set the framework within which businesses have to operate and can set up also the incentives for innovation and giving businesses a reason to innovate. But what I'd like to ask Polly to expand on how the International Criminal Courts and the legislation on crimes against peace affect non-signatory countries. What does it do? Why is it that we don't need all these countries to sign? How does it affect countries like the United States and Argentina that have not signed up for wars against peace or crimes against peace, genocide, etc.? And if you could just expand on how that actually works.
The Rome Statute is the codifying document that set up the International Criminal Court. And that's done as a result of a certain amount of signatories being put in place, and then it became international law. Now, there is actually a principle in international criminal law called ergo omnes, which means that once it becomes international criminal law, it flows to all. Doesn't mean everyone has to sign up to it for it to apply. And I'll give you an example of this, and this is why we don't actually need in law to have every single country signing up to this. All you need is that 2/3 majority, and this is a fact, this is a legal fact, that then it steps into the realms of being lawful, a law in its own right. There is an issue as to how many more votes you want to include or take or what have you, and it's open. It's a signatories. Well, he didn't arrive. He wasn't going to road test that precedent. And that's what's so very interesting here. You may get a lot of noise coming from Canada and America, but their heads of state will not want to road test that in the same way that Pinochet was subjected to it. So it fundamentally shifts norms. And yes, the ICC hasn't actually taken any prosecutions against countries that aren't signatories. But it is very interesting. We now have a new head prosecutor that's just taken over at the ICC, Batu Bensouda, who's actually from Africa. And it's a fast evolving arena, and it's maturing very fast. It may be one thing to say it's early days yet, but one thing we do know is it works, and it is very powerful. Believe it or not, genocide figures have dropped enormously. And it's a very powerful disincentive if you're, a nutty insurgent up a mountain and you think, well, we'll just go and commit genocide by wiping out a few thousand over the other side. There's wonderful footage, there's a great documentary out there that shows that, you suddenly decide that if you're going to end up in front of The Hague for crimes against humanity, you think twice about it. So there's the preventative and preemptive aspect of an international law ecocide. But also there is this interesting thing. It's not a question of whether or not it's a reality, I think, Nikolai. I think actually what it is here is a question as to whether or not we stand up and say we have to take action here. And we have to put something in place that prevents mass damage and destruction. Now, I'm actually in a lot of agreement with Nikolai. I agree that we have to look after our companies. I agree that we have to make more jobs. I agree that this is very important, that we don't cause instability in our economies and the way we run our businesses and what have you. This is legislation that will make sure that none of that happens in the long run. And that's why it is a legacy issue, and that's why it does take bold, moral and courageous leadership. And it's not just a Green Party issue, this is transboundary, this crosses all parties. And I can see from what Nikolai is saying that he really cares. You know, he's really engaging in these issues. And I'm really asking Nikolai to have a think about this. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you a gift.
I promised the panel and I promised many other people that we were going to end this by 8, and we are running a bit over time. So I thought we'd just end with a few concluding statements from the panelists if they have something they want to add, and we can perhaps start with Nikolai. Are you the Charles Grant figure Paul is looking for?
I'm just going to say that I'm going to go home and read this book, and I hear what you say. And I'm sure this is a debate that we will have both in Norway and in other countries, and it's an important debate, and it's about how we solve these huge common challenges that we have, and there's not one solution. I think that's my key message. There's not one big idea which is going to solve the problem. We need good laws. I agree on that, and I'm going to read this and have a think.
Yes, I thought this was a very informed and an interesting evening. And as Paul Crutzen, a prominent Nobel scientist, once said, that we are moving now from the Holocene, one geological epoch, to another, which is called the Anthropocene, which is the man-made era. So that we are, you as a politician, you are actually in a totally new situation with a totally new responsibility. And I think one good idea would be that you took up your colleagues' point of view. The Minister of Environment, Bård Vegar Solhjell, just wrote a book. And in that book he says that he is sick and tired of the Parliament debating so many minor issues, especially around the budget time and stuff like that. So his proposal in this book was that the Lagting, one of the chambers in the Parliament, should be renamed sort of the Parliament's idea and debate forum. And I proposed that one of the first persons you should invite to the Parliament would be Polly. I also proposed that someone proposed to the Norwegian NHO, the employees' organization, that for next year's major meeting, they have a major meeting each year, they just had one now on energy, they should invite Polly to give the main talk. I think that would be very interesting, and to pinpoint the triple bottom line, which is going to be the melody of the future. Thank you.
Would you like to say something? I guess there are many people there who are inspired by what you've been saying. Could you say a little bit about how they can contribute, and is there any way of them getting engaged in this question?
First of all, thank you very much for taking time out to come to this meeting and to listen to the debate. This is working, yes. And secondly, to say that this is an idea whose time has come. As and when it is actually implemented is really down to civilization as a whole, and when we start engaging on this. In terms of practical steps, the website eradicatingecocide.com has an awful lot of different ways you can engage, from social media to there are actually youth packs, and we're now mapping the growing engagement around this, what I'm calling Wish 20. My wish is for the end of the era of ecocide, and I genuinely believe this can play out in my life. Absolutely, why not? And I'm committed to giving my life to doing that. And to actually go onto the map and map your support, and there's an opportunity for you to put your wish there as well, as to what you wish to see happening to help enable and empower us to move into an era of really global peace. and a world where we no longer cause mass damage and destruction. And that's very important because actually what we're doing is creating a collective wish. But also it has important implications because when I am invited in by governments across the world to legally advise on this, and they ask, well, you know, who's supporting this and what's happening out there, it's far easier to actually open up and show a map. And that's exciting for all of us to visually see how this will grow and develop. And we're going to see this roll out this next year with the draft Ecocide Directive that's on the table. So if you have any friends in Europe, you know, do actively encourage them to put their vote to it. There's a wonderful website that has been put up by the citizens who are driving it forward called endecocide.com. But lastly, it's really about please do shine your light. Each and every single one of us is like a lighthouse. And when we stand up and speak out as voices for the earth, what we do is we enable and empower others to do the same. Charles Grant was the businessman who stood up and spoke out in Wilberforce's time, and when he did that, two things happened. Government listened and took action, but also many others stood up and spoke out from within industry as well. What they'd been saying behind private doors was that slavery must stop, but he encouraged and emboldened others to stand up and go public and support it as well. And that's what this is really about, giving encouragement to others to stand up and speak out. Thank you very much for your time.